think I'm just going to have to get some food. BRB.
The original WoW developers have already given us the exact blueprint for Classic Plus. You know, the upcoming MMO that's based on the original World of Warcraft. But here's the craziest part. The information from one verified Classic Plus alpha tester, it perfectly matches those blueprints. See, the original 2004 World of Warcraft, it actually cut a whole lot of very beloved ideas that the developers had. There was a massive list of cut things, according to John Statz, who's known for creating masterpieces like Deadmines and Karazhan.
That's the whiteboard with this is the designer's whiteboard.
Didn't we call it the list of love?
Yeah, this was so that ideas didn't get forgotten. This is
Oh
back
yeah,
to
they had a whole long list.
Because it's like, hey, these are great ideas, but we can't get to them, so we're going to keep them in this file.
But really, why was so much content cut from the original vanilla? Grim Batul, the Emerald Dream, even Karazhan itself? Well, there are really two very fascinating reasons. The first reason, well, it really comes back to technology. Every single decision the original developers had to make, it came back to limitations and what the engine could actually handle. In fact, the very first expansion, the Burning Crusade, with, you know, the outline and everything, it wasn't picked because it was the only option they had, but because if Blizzard even tried to add more content to Azeroth, the game simply could not have handled it. When the landmasses were finalized, when everything was finalized, pretty much the game was capped.
The reason why we did the Burning Crusade was because we had to keep people off of Azeroth. There's so much data on those two world tabs. The Eastern Kingdoms is one world tab. That's why you get a hard load when you go from there to a dungeon or from there to the Kalimdor. Yeah, Joe, the server guy, Joe Rumsey was like, guys, there's too much data. There's way too much data. We can't keep adding zones to these areas. So that's why we went to the Burning Crusade. Maybe to let the server architecture and hardware catch up with our plans.
But it gets deeper than that too, because the reality was that the original expansion the developers wanted was not actually the Burning Crusade in the first place. If the technology had allowed it, the original expansion that Blizzard dreamed of adding was a South Seas expansion. It would have been very pirate themed. Mind you, this was when Pirates of the Caribbean came out, so it makes sense, and it would feature areas like Tel Aviv. The planning of a South Seas expansion is even shown on the whiteboards around Blizzard's offices during development.
Our first expansion was going to be South Seas. We liked Booty Bay so much. Some people romanticized about the idea of sailing a ship. We were thinking of Nadjatar being a source where the Naga. That was the days where, you know, we thought the Naga were going to be a playable race.
Ultimately, though, the technology limits, they weren't just for adding because they also really permeated.
And how the hell did the TurtleWoW add so stuff then?
And raids, where it really is a miracle that we got so many epic dungeons like Blackrock Depths. Every single step of the way, the developers were fighting the tools and the limitations of the engine and what was actually even possible. Now, in 2026, the technology is vastly superior to what it was back then, and MMO limits, they just aren't what they used to be. In Classic Plus, the original developer ideas and designs, well, they can truly finally be realized. Imagine dungeons that are even bigger than Blackrock Depths, bigger and grander raids too. Maybe they throw in an 80-man raid, and one leak even mentioned a Blackrock Depths raid, instantly turning BRD into a freaking Old War level epic. Or imagine Blizzard giving us the most epic version of Grim Batul ever. Or even finally and fully realizing the original vision of the Dragon Isles. The Dragon Isles, which were cut, were incredibly ambitious. It featured content like a 60-man raid. And the reasons the Dragon Isles were cut went beyond just technology. See, the original vision of World of Warcraft, it changed so much during development. The level cap at launch wasn't meant to be 60. It was actually meant to be 70. And the Dragon Isles were technically meant to be a 65 to 70 zone. When the level cap was dropped to 60, the zone no longer really felt needed. Ultimately, that was the case with a lot of the scrap content. Vanilla World of Warcraft, at first, was designed with leveling taking a really long-ass time. You can imagine leveling from 1 to 70 with vanilla XP rates. It would have been a kind of a quit-your-job situation. But even 1 to 60, the original design facilitated very slow leveling. Originally, the game was about slowly grinding mobs, and just doing that over and over and over again. And you can imagine that would not have led to very fast leveling. But here's the thing. By 2004, the way you leveled up in the game had changed massively.
And we kind of had an oh shit moment right after that Elwyn Forest playtest where we realized like we had vastly underestimated the number of quests we were going to need. We decided in World of Warcraft, we said, why don't we make the path of least resistance? So in this case, the way to get the best experience, the fastest, not to be killing creatures in one place, but we'll overload the experience into the quests themselves, and then that will move you through the world, which will get you to see everything. It will enable us to tell these awesome storylines.
As a result of making the game quest-based instead of grind-based, leveling got a lot faster. While most players definitely preferred the questing style to grinding aimlessly, maybe you disagree, but ultimately it meant Blizzard had a very tough decision on their hands. Leveling got to a place where it was fast enough and good enough to ship. At some point, Blizzard had to make the decision, okay, some of this dream developer content, it just isn't going to be able to make it into the game in time for launch. And remember the technology limits. Once those decisions were made, they were really set in stone for a very long time. And it was 5+ years before any really meaningful changes were made to the game, because making major changes and additions to Azeroth, it just wasn't technologically possible. But forget the potentially very, very promising tech improvements in Classic Plus, because we need to go back to the leak itself on MMO Champion. It specifically mentions that Classic Plus, it's going to value your time, and also you'll be slowing things down and soaking in the world around you. Maybe it's not so endgame focused anymore. All of a sudden, all the cut content that Blizzard wanted to put in the game that they just couldn't because of time limits, well, it can come back. It makes perfect and complete sense to add all of those cut features and ideas and zones and quests back into the game. The Dragon Isles, or Tel Aviv, or Hyjal, or Gilneas even.
To be honest,
Suddenly fits perfectly
it's so fucking stupid. They could have gotten a hand of the Unillustrated client and then just released
it could work perfectly. The original South Seas expansion. Why not
released World of Warcraft in the Unreal Engine and also add everything that he's talking about now.
But because visually it just didn't look right in the 2004 technology. These were the right ideas at the wrong time. The tech just wasn't there to support them. Ultimately, the game had to ship at some point. But in 2026, every single one of these ideas is completely possible. All of the cut content that the original
Well, yeah, we'll see in September what Blizzard actually is going to do.
Battle for the Abyss by Ben Counter. Read by Gareth Armstrong. Chapter 1. bearers of the word, let slip our cloaks. The death of Croithne. Olympus Mons burned bright and spat a plume of fire into the sky. Below the immense edifice of rock lay the primary sprawling metropolis of Mars. Trackways and factorums bustled with red-robed acolytes, pursued dutifully by lobotomized servitors, bipedal machine constructs, thronging menials, and imperious Skitari. Domed hab blisters, stark cooling towers, and monolithic forge temples vied for position amidst the red dust. Soaring chimneys, pockmarked by millennia of endeavor, belched thick, acrid smoke into a burning sky. Hulking compressor houses vented steam high over the industrious swell, like the breath of gods from arcane blasting kilns carved into the heart of the world, so vast, so fathomless, a labyrinthine conurbation as intricate and self-involved as its fervent populace. Such innumerate petty meanderings were as inconsequential as a fragment of coal in the blast furnaces of the mountain forges, so great was the undertaking of that day. Few knew of its significance, and fewer still witnessed the anonymous shuttle drone launch from the hidden caldera in the Valles Marineris. The drone surged into the stratosphere, piercing cloud-like crimson smog. Through writhing storms of purple-black pollution and wells of geothermal heat that hammered deep bruises into the sky, it breached the freezing mesosphere, the drone's outer shell burning white with effort. Plasma engines screaming, it drove on further into the thermosphere, the rays of the sun turning the layer into a blazing veil of relentless heat. Breaking the exosphere at last, the shuttle's engines eased. This was to be a one-way trip. Preset tracking beacons found their destination quickly. It was far beyond the red dust of Martian skies, far beyond prying eyes and questions. The shuttle was headed for Jupiter. Thule had orbited the shipyards of Jupiter for 6 millennia. Suspended high above the gaseous surface of its patron planet, it dwelled innocuously beyond the greater Galilean moons, Callisto, Ganymede, Europa, and Io. It was an ugly chunk of rock, its gravity so weak that its form was misshapen and mutated. Such considerations were of little concern to the Mechanicum. What place did appearance and the aesthetic have in the heart of the machine? Precision, exactness, function. They were all that mattered. Though of little consequence, Thule was to become something more than just a barren hunk of rock. It had been hollowed out by massive boring machines and filled with conduits, vast tunnels, and chambers. Millions of menials, drones, and acolytes toiled in the subterranean labyrinth, so great was the deed that they were charged to perform. In effect, the dead core of Thule had become a giant factorum of forge temples and compressors, a massive gravity engine, its beating heart. This construction extended from the surface via metal tendrils that supported blister domes, clinging like limpets to the rock, and pneumatic lifter arrays. Thule was no mere misshapen asteroid. It was an orbital shipyard of Jupiter, and one that had guests. "We stand upon the brink of a new era." Through the Vox amplifier built into his gorget, Zadkiel's voice resonated powerfully in the gargantuan chamber. Behind him, the exoskeletal structure of Thule shipyard loomed large and forbidding against the cold reaches of space. Here, within one of the station's blister domes, he and his charges were protected from the ravages of the asteroid's surface. Solar winds scoured the rock, bleaching it white, the inexorable erosion creating a miasma of nitrogen-thick, rolling dust. "A red dawn is rising, and it will drown our enemies in blood. Heed the power of the word, and know it is our destiny." Zadkiel bellowed as he delivered the sermon, animated and fervent, upon a dais of obsidian. Scripture carved into his patrician features and bald skull added unneeded gravitas to Zadkiel's oratory. His grey, turbulent eyes conveyed vehemence and surety. His fists encased in baroque gauntlets, Zadkiel gripped the edge of the lectern and assumed an insistent posture. He wore his full battle armor, a fledging suit of crimson ceramite yet to bear the scars of conflict. Replete with the horns of Colchis, in honor of the Primarch's homeworld and the symbol of a proud and distinguished heritage, it represented the new era of which Zadkiel spoke. The word-bearers' legion had been denied their true nature for too long. Now they had shed the simulacra of obedience and capitulation, the trappings of compromise and denial. Their new power armor, fresh from the forges of Mars and etched with the epistles of Lorgar, was a testament to that treaty. The grey granite suits of feigned ignorance were destroyed in the heart of Olympus Mons. Clad in the vestments of enlightenment, they would be reborn. A vast ocean of crimson stretched before Zadkiel as he stood erect behind his pulpit of stone. 1,000 Astartes watched him dutifully, a full chapter split into 10 companies, each 100 strong, their captains to the fore. All heeded the word. The legionaries were resplendent in their power armor, bolters held at salute in their armored fists, clutched like holy idols. Zadkiel's suit was the mirror image of those of his warriors, although sheaves of prayer parchment, scorched trails of vellum writ over with litanies of battle, and the bloodied pages ripped from sermons of retribution were affixed to it. When he spoke, it was with the zealous conviction of the rhetoric he wore. "Heed the power of the word, and know this is our destiny." The congregation roared in affirmation, their voices as one. "We have our lance of vengeance. Let it strike out the heart of Gilliman and his weakling legion," Zadkiel bellowed, swept up by his own vitriolic proclamations. "Long have we waited for retribution. Long have we dwelt in shadow." Zadkiel stepped forward, his iron-hard gaze urging his warriors to greater fervour. "Now is the time," he said, smashing his clenched fist down upon the lectern to punctuate the remark. "We shall cast off falsehoods and the shackles of our feigned obeisance," he snarled, as if the words left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Let's slip our cloaks and reveal our true glory. Brothers, we are bearers of the word, the sons of Lorgar. Let the impassioned words of our dark apostles be as poisoned blades in the hearts of the false emperor's lapdogs. Witness our ascension," he said, turning to face the great arch behind him. It was surrounded by massively over-engineered machinery, as if the scaffold supporting the hordes of menials and engine seers had been built around it, and thick trails of reinforced hosing bled away the pneumatic pressure required to keep the gargantuan vessel elevated. Cathedra soared from the ship's ornate hull, their spires groping for the stars like crooked fingers. So armoured, it could withstand even a concerted assault from a defence laser battery. In fact, it had been forged with that very purpose in mind. Its blunt bullet prow and the way its flanks splayed out to encompass the enormous midsection spoke of strength and precision. 3 massive crenellated decks extended from it like the sharpened prongs of a Stygian trident. Twin banks of laser batteries gleamed in dull gunmetal down its broadsides. A single volley would have annihilated the loading bay and everyone in it. Cannon mounts sat idle on angular blocks of metal filled with viewpoints that hinted of the myriad chambers within. The rapacious bristle of the defensive turrets along the dorsal and ventral spines and the dark indentations of the torpedo tubes shimmered with violent intent. Spiked antenna towers punched outward from multitudinous subdecks, interspersed with further weapon arrays and torpedo bays. The ship's ribbed belly shimmered like oil and was replete with dozens of fighter hangars. At the stern, the huge cowlings of the exhausts flared over the deep glow of the warming engines, primed to unleash enough thrust to force the warship away from Thule. Like chrome hexagons, the engine vents were so vast and terrible that to stare into their dormant hearts was to engulf all sense and reason in a fathomless darkened void. Finally, sheets of shielding peeled off the prow, revealing a massive figurehead. A book, wreathed in flame, wrought from gold and silver. Words of Lorgar's choosing were engraved on the pages in letters many meters high. It was the greatest and largest vessel ever forged, unique in every way and powerful beyond reckoning. Such was the sight of it, like some creature born from the depths of an infinite and ancient ocean, that even Zadkiel fell silent. "Our spear is made ready," Zadkiel said at last, his voice choked with awe. "The furious abyss." This ship, this mighty ship, had been made for them, and here in the Jovian shipyards its long-awaited construction had finally reached an end. This was to be a blow against the Emperor, a blow for Horus. None could know of the vessel's existence until it was too late. steps had been taken to ensure that remained the case.
BRB guys, just gonna let the audiobook play.
Thule was part of that deceit, but only part. Zadkiel turned on his heel to face his warriors. "Let us wield it," he extolled with vociferous intensity. "Death to the false emperor!" "Death to the false emperor!" his congregation replied like a violent blast wave. "Horus exultant!" Discipline broke down. The assembled throng bellowed and roared as if possessed, smashing their fists against their armor. Oaths of hatred and of devout loyalty were shouted fervently, and the building sound rose to an unearthly clamor. Zadkiel closed his eyes amidst the maelstrom of devotion and savored, drank deep of the zealotry. When he opened his eyes again, he faced the archway and the landscape of the furious abyss. Smiling grimly, he thought of what the vessel represented, and he imagined its awesome destructive potential. There was none other like it in all of the Imperium, none with the same firepower, none with the same resilience. It had been forged with one deliberate mission in mind, and it would need all of its strength and endurance to achieve it. The annihilation of a legion. In the darker recesses of the massive loading bay, now an impromptu cathedra, others watched and listened. Unfeeling eyes regarded the magnificent array of soldiery from the shadows, the product of the Emperor's ingenuity, even perhaps his hubris, and felt nothing. "Curious, my master, that this Astartes should exhibit such an emotional response to our labors." "They are flesh, Magos Epsilon, and as such are governed by petty concerns," remarked Kelbor Hal to the bent-backed acolyte stooped alongside him. The Fabricator General had purposely taken the long journey from Mars to Thule aboard his personal barge. He had done so under the pretense of a tour of the Jovian shipyards, overseeing atmospheric mining on the surface of Jupiter, reviewing the operations on Io, and observing vehicle and armor production within the hive cities of Europa. All of which would explain his presence on Thule. The truth was that the Fabricator General wanted to witness this momentous event. It was not pride that drove him to do it, for such a thing was beyond one so close to absolute communion with the Omnissiah. Rather, it was out of the compulsion to mark it. One endeavor was much like another to the Fabricator General, the requirements of form and function outweighing the need for ceremony and majesty. Yet here he stood, swathed in black robes, a symbol of his allegiance to the War Master and his commitment to his cause. Had he not sanctioned Master Adept Urtzi Malevolus to forge Horus's armor? Had he not also allowed the commissioning of vast quantities of materiel, munitions, and the machines of war? Yes, he had done all of this. He had done it because it suited his purposes, the burgeoning desire, or rather intrinsic programming, within the servants of the great machine god to gradually become one with their slumbering deity. Horus had unfettered Mars in its pursuit of the divine machine, countermanding the Emperor's chastening. For Kelbor Hal, the question of his allegiance and that of the Mechanicum was one of logic, and had required mere nanoseconds of computation. "He sees beauty where we see function and form," the Fabricator General continued. "Strength, Magos Epsilon, strength made through fire and steel. That is what we have wrought." Magos Epsilon, also robed in black, nodded in agreement, grateful for his overlord's enlightenment. "They are human after a fashion," the Fabricator General explained, "and we are as far removed from that weakness as the cogitators aboard that ship." Immensely tall, his ribcage exposed through the ragged edge of his robes, with ribbed pipes and tendril-like servos replacing organs, veins, and flesh, Kelbor Hal was anything but human. He no longer wore a face, preferring a cold steel void implanted with a curious array of sunken green, orb-like diodes in place of eyes. A set of mechadendrite claws and arms stretched from his back like those of an arachnid, replete with blades, saws, and other arcane machinery. His voice was devoid of all emotion, synthesized through a vox implant that droned with artificial coldness and indifference. As Kelbor Hal watched the phalanx of Astartes boarding the ship through the tube-like umbilical cords that snaked from the vessel's loading ramps to the blister dome, their bombastic leader swelling with phlegmatic pride, the internal cron within his memory engrams alerted him that time was short. Dully, the furious Abyss's thrusters growled to life, and the great vessel strained vertically against the lifter clamps. A low yet insistent hum of building power from the awakening plasma engines followed, discernible even through the plexiglass of the blister dome. With the Astartes and their crew aboard, the furious Abyss was preparing to launch. A data probe snicked from the end of one of the Fabricator General's twitching mechadendrites and fed into a cylindrical console that had emerged from a hangar floor. Interfacing with the device, Kelbor Hal inputted the code sequence required to launch the ship. A series of icons upon the face of the console lit up, and a slowly building hum of power resonated throughout the launch chamber. Lead Magi Lorvax Etterman, part of the coterie of acolytes and attendant menials who had gathered to observe the launch, was permitted to activate the first sequence of explosions that would release the furious Abyss. He did so, without ceremony. Lines of explosions, like stitches of fire, rippled along the side of the dock. Lifters, assembly rays, and webs of scaffolding fell away into the darkness where magnetic tugs waited to gather the wreckage. Slabs of radiation shielding lifted from the ship's hull. The last dregs in the refueling barges ignited in bright ribbons of fire. The plasma engines roared, loud and throaty, scorching a blue swathe of fire and heat across the surface of Thule. A new star was rising in the darkling sky, so terrible and wonderful that it defied expression. It was a thunderous metal god given form, and it would light the galaxy aflame with its wrath. At last, the furious Abyss was under way. As Kelbor Hal watched it lift majestically into the firmament and registered the heavy thrum of its engines, a single tiny vestige of emotion blinked into existence within him. It was an ephemeral thing, barely quantifiable. Accessing internal cogitators, interfacing with his personal memory engrams, the Fabricator General found its expression. It was awe. The drone ship waited deep within the heart of Thule, accessed through a series of clandestine tunnels and lesser-known chambers. As it made its approach, the still toiling menials and servitors paid it no notice, program wafers ensuring that they remained intent on their work. So the shuttle passed them by, slowly, unchallenged, unseen. Once through the myriad tunnels, the drone waited for several hours, docked in a small antechamber that fed off the vast gravity engine at the asteroid's core. An hour earlier, Fabricator General Kelbor Hal's personal barge had departed the station, the head of the Mechanicum leaving his subordinate Magos Epsilon to organize the cleanup after the launch of the Furious Abyss. It was to be the last vessel that left Thule. Pre-programmed activation protocols abruptly came online in the servitor pilot slave to the drone shuttle. A mix of chemicals, separated within the body of the servitor pilot, became merged as they were fed into a shared chamber. Once combined, the harmless chemicals became a volatile solution capable of incredible destructive force. A second after the solution became fully merged, a small incendiary charge ignited their fury. The immediate firestorm engulfed the ship and spread out, the growing conflagration billowing down tunnels and through access pipes, incinerating labouring menials. When it struck the gravity engine, the resultant explosions began a cataclysmic chain reaction. It took only minutes for the asteroid to break into flame-wreathed fragments. There was no time to flee to safety, and no survivors. Every adept, servitor, and menial was burned to ash. The debris field would spread far and wide, but the asteroid was far enough away, locked at the farthest point of its horseshoe orbit, not to trouble Jupiter. It would not escape notice, but it was also of such little consequence that any investigation would take months to effect and ratify. None would discover the thing that had been wrought upon the asteroid's surface until it was much, much too late. Much technology was lost in Thule's destruction. It was a steep price to pay for absolute and certain secrecy. In the end, the Fabricator General's will had been done. He had willed the death of Thule. Chapter 2. Hector's Fate. Brothers of Ultramar. In the Lair of the Wolf. It was dark in the reclusium. Brother Captain Hector kept his breathing measured as he prosecuted another thrust with his short blade. He followed with a smash from his combat shield, and then twisted his body out of the committed attack to make a feint. Crouching low, blackness surrounding him in the chapel-like antechamber, he spun on his heel and repeated the maneuver in the opposite direction. Swipe, thrust, block, thrust, smash, feint, turn, and repeat, over and over like a physical mantra. With each successive pass, he added a flourish, a riposte here, a leaping thrust there. The cycles increased in pace and intensity, and darkness enveloping him, honing his focus, building to an apex of speed and complexity, at which point Hector would gradually slow until at peace once more. Standing stock still, maintaining control of his breathing, Hector came to the end of the training regime. "Light," he commanded, and a pair of ornate lamps flared into life on either wall, illuminating a Spartan chamber. Dressed in only sandals and a loincloth, Hector's body was cast in a sheen of sweat that glistened in the artificial lamplight. The curves of his enhanced musculature were accentuated within its glow. Indulging in a moment of introspection, Hector regarded the span of his hands. They were large and strong, and bereft of any scars. He made a fist with the right. "I am the Emperor's sword," he whispered, and then clenched his left. "Through me is his will enacted." Two robed acolytes waiting patiently in the shadows, cowls concealing their augmetics and other obvious deformities. Even without being compared to the tall slab of muscle that was an Astartes, they were bent-backed and diminutive. Hector ignored their obsequiousness as he released the straps affixing the combat shield to his arm and handed it over, along with his short blade, to the acolytes. He looked at the ground as his attendants retreated silently into the shadow's penumbra at the edge of the room. An engraved U was carved into the center of the chamber, chased in silver on a circular field of blue. Hector stood in the middle of it, in exactly the position that he had started. He allowed himself a smile as he beckoned his attendants to bring forth his armor. A great day was fast approaching. It had been a long time since he had seen his fellow Ultramarines. He and 500 of his battle brothers had been far from their native Ultramar for 3 years, as they helped prosecute the Emperor's great crusade to bring enlightenment to the galaxy and repatriate the lost colonies of man by fighting the Vectates of Arcanath. The Vectati were a deviant culture, an alien overmind that had enslaved the human populace of Arcanath. Hector and his warrior brothers had shattered the yoke that bound their unfortunate human kin, and in so doing had destroyed the Vectates. The human populace owed fealty to the Imperium and demonstrated it gladly when they were free of tyranny. It had been a grim war. The Fist had been involved in a brutal ship-to-ship action against the enemy, but had prevailed. Repairs had been conducted on Arcanath, as well as the requisitioning of a small tithe of men, eager to venture beyond the stars to help replenish elements of the ship's crew. Once the war was over, Hector and his battle brothers had been summoned to the Calth system and the region of space known as Ultramar. At long last, they would be reunited with their brothers and their Primarch. Hector was full of pride at the thought of seeing Reboot Gilliman again, his gene-father and noble leader of the Ultramarines Legion. The deciphered messages from the Fist of Macragge's astropaths had been clear. The War Master himself, mighty Horus, had ordered the Legion to the Veridan system. Gilliman had ratified the War Master's edict and instructed all disparate Ultramarine forces to muster at Calth. There they would take on supplies and rendezvous with their brothers in preparation to launch a strike on an Orc invasion force besieging the worlds of neighboring Veridan. A short detour to the Vangelis spaceport to take on some more battle brothers stationed there, and the campaign to liberate Veridan would be underway. Fully armored, Hector strode down an access tunnel and headed towards the bridge. His ship, the Fist of Macragge, was a Luna-class battleship named in honor of the Ultramarines' homeworld. Deckhands, comms officers, and other Legion serfs bustled past the Astartes down the cramped confines of one of the vessel's main thoroughfares. The faint hiss of escaping pressure greeted Hector's arrival on the bridge as the automated portal allowed him entry, before sliding shut in his wake. "Captain on the bridge!" bellowed Ivan Cervantes, the ship's helmsmaster. Cervantes was a human, and despite being dwarfed by the mighty Astartes, he remained straight-backed and proud before the glorious countenance of his captain. Cervantes snapped a sharp salute with an augmetic hand. His original body part had been lost on Arkenath, together with his left eye during the boarding action against the Vectates. The bionic replacement glowed dull red in the half-light of the bridge. Screen illumination from various consoles threw stark slashes into the gloom, the activation icons upon them grainy and emerald. Crewmen, hard-wired directly into the vessel's controls from access ports bolted into their shaved scalps, worked with silent diligence. Others stood, consulting data slates, observing sensor readings, and otherwise maintaining the Fist of Macragge's smooth and uninterrupted passage through real space. Lobotomized servitors performed and monitored the ship's mundane functions with precise circadian rhythm. "As you were, Helmsmaster," Hector replied, climbing a short flight of steps that led to a raised dais at the forefront of the bridge and sitting down at a large command throne at its center. "How far are we from Vangelis spaceport?" Hector asked. "We expect to arrive in approximately—" Warning icons flashed large and insistent on the forward viewport in front of the command throne, interrupting the Helmsmaster in mid-flow. "What is it?" Hector demanded, his tone calm and level. Cervantes hastily consulted a console beside him. "Proximity warning," he explained quickly, still poring over the data that had started churning from the console. Hector leaned forward in his command throne, his tone urgent. "Proximity warning? From what? We are alone in real space." "I know, sire. It just appeared." Cervantes was frantically consulting more data as the organized routine of the bridge was thrust into immediate and urgent action. "It's another ship," said the Helmsmaster. "It's huge. I've never seen such a vessel." "Impossible," barked Hector. "What of the Sensorium and the Astropaths? How could it have got so close to us so quickly?" he demanded. "I don't know, sire. There was no warning," said Cervantes. "Bring it up on the view screen," Hector ordered. Blast shields retracted smoothly from the front view screen, revealing a swathe of real space beyond. There, like black on night, was the largest ship Hector had ever seen. It was shaped like a long blade, with 3 massive decks that speared out from the hull, like prongs on a trident. Points of intense red light flared in unison down the vessel's port side as it turned to show the Fist of Macragge its broadside. The light illuminated more of the ship so that it stretched the entire length of the view screen. It was even larger than Hector at first assumed. Even several kilometers from the Fist of Macragge, it was rendered massive in the glow of its laser batteries. "Name of terror!" Hector gasped when he realized what was happening. The terrible vessel that had somehow foiled all of their sensors, even their astropathic warning systems, was firing. "Raise forward arc shields!" Hector cried as the first impact wave struck the bridge. A bank of consoles on the left suddenly exploded outward, shredding a servitor with shrapnel and all but immolating one of the deck crew. The bridge shuddered violently. Crewmen clutched their consoles to stay upright. Servitor drones went immediately into action, dousing sporadic fires with foam. Hector gripped the arms of his command throne as critical warning klaxons howled in the tight space, and crimson lightning shone like blood as emergency power immediately kicked in. "Forward shields!" Hector cried again as a secondary impact wave threw the Astartes from his command throne. "Helmsmaster Cervantes! At once!" Hector urged, getting to his feet. No answer came. Ivan Cervantes was dead, the left side of his body horribly burned by one of the many fires erupting all across the bridge. What was left of the crew worked frantically to reroute power, close off compromised sections, and find firing solutions so that they might at least retaliate. "Somebody get me power! Lances! Anything!" Hector roared. It was utter chaos, as the carefully drilled battle routines were made a mockery of by the sudden and unexpected attack. "We have sustained critical damage, sire," explained one of Cervantes' subordinates, blood running freely down the side of his face. Behind him, Hector saw other crewmen writhing in agony. Some were prone on the bridge floor and not moving at all. "We're dead in the void!" Hector's face was grim in the gory glow of the bridge, a burst of sparks from a shorting console casting his features in stark relief. "Get me an astropath." "A distress call, sire?" asked the crewman, fighting to be heard above the chaotic din. The silhouettes of his colleagues rushed back and forth to stem the damage, desperately trying to restore order in spite of the fact that it was hopeless. "We are beyond help," Hector uttered with finality as the fist of Macrag's system started failing. "Send a warning." Cestus knelt in silent reflection within one of the sanctums in the Omega quarter of Vangelis spaceport. The vast orbital station was built into a large moon and based around several hexagonal blisters into which docks, communion temples, and muster halls were housed. A labyrinthine tramway connected each and every location of Vangelis, which was organized into a series of courtyards or quarters to make navigation rudimentary. The bustling spaceport was crammed with traders, naval crewmen, and mechrites. A large proportion of its area had been given over to the Astartes. Vangelis was a galactic waymarker, and small numbers of Astartes involved in more discreet missions used it as a gathering point. Once their objective was completed, they would congregate at one of the many muster halls designated for their legion and await pickup by their battleships. Though little more than a company from any given legion would be expecting transit at any one time, sectors Kappa through Theta were at the complete disposal of the legions. Few non-Astartes were ever seen there, barring ubiquitous legion serfs and attendants, though occasionally remembrancers would be granted brief access in concordance with maintaining good relations with the human populace. Cestus drank in the darkness of the sanctum and used it to clear his thoughts. He was fully armoured and pressed his left gauntlet against the sweeping silver U emblazoned on the cuirass of his power armour, symbol of the great Ultramarines' Legion, whilst keeping his head bowed. Soon, he thought. He and 9 of his battle brothers had been on Vangelis for over a month. They had been acting as honour guard for an imperial dignitary at nearby Ithilrium, and were consequently separated from the rest of their legion. Their sabbatical had passed slowly for Cestus. At first he had thought it curious and enlightening to mix with the human population of the spaceport, but even bereft of his power armour and swathed in legionary robes, he was greeted with awe and fear. Unlike some of his brothers, it wasn't a reaction that he relished. Cestus had kept to Astartes' quarters after that. The fact that transit was inbound to extract them from Vangelis and ferry him and his brothers to Ultramar and their Primarch and Legion filled Cestus with relief. He longed to embark on the Great Crusade again, to be out on the battlefields of a heathen galaxy, bringing order and solidity. Word had reached them that the War Master Horus had already departed for the planet of Istvan III to quell a rebellion against the Imperium. Cestus was envious of his legion brothers, the World Eaters, Death Guard, and Emperor's children, who were en route with the War Master. Though Cestus craved the esoteric and was fascinated by culture and erudite learning, he was a warrior. It had been bred into him. To deny it was to deny the very genetic construct of his being. He could no more do that than he could go against the will and patriarchal wisdom of the Emperor. Such a thing could not be countenanced, so Cestus sought the seclusion of the meditative sanctum. "You have no need to genuflect on my account, brother." A deep voice came from behind Cestus, who was on his feet and facing the intruder in one swift motion. "Antiges," said Cestus, sheathing his short blade at his hip. Normally Cestus would have rebuked his battle brother for such a disrespectful remark, but he had formed an especially strong bond with Antiges, one that transcended rank, even of the Ultramarines. It was a bond that had served the battle brothers well, their whole much more than the sum of their parts, as it was for the Legion in its entirety. Where Cestus was governed by emotion but prone to caution, Antiges was at times choleric and insistent, and less intense than his brother captain. Together they provided one another with balance. Battle brother Antiges was similarly attired to his fellow Astartes. The sweeping bulk and curve of his blue power armour reflected that of Cestus, together with the statutory icons of the Ultramarines. Pauldrons, vambrace, and gorget were all trimmed with gold, and a gilt brocade hung from Antiges' left shoulder pad to the right breast of his armour's corselet. Neither Astartes wore a helmet. Antiges fastened to a clasp at his belt, while Cestus's head was framed by a silver laurel over his blonde hair, his battle helm cradled beneath his arm. "A little on edge, brother captain." Antigui's slate-grey eyes, the mirror of his closely cropped skull, flashed. "Do you desire to be out amongst the stars, commanding part of the fleet again?" As well as a company captain, Cestus also bore the rank of fleet commander. During his sojourn on Ithilrium, that aspect of his duty had been briefly suspended. Antiguis was right. He did desire to be back with the fleet, fighting the enemies of the Emperor. "At the prospect of you lurking in the shadows, waiting to reveal yourself," Cestus returned sternly and stepped forward. He managed to maintain the chastening expression for only a moment, before he smiled broadly and clapped Antiguis on the shoulder. "Well met, brother," Cestus said, clasping Antiguis' forearm firmly. "Well met," Antiguis replied, returning the greeting. "I have come to take you away from here, brother captain," he added. "We are mustering for the arrival of the Fist of Macragge." It was a short journey from the sanctum of Communion Temple Omega to the dock where the rest of Cestus's and Antiguis' battle brothers awaited them. A narrow promenade, lined with ferns and intricate statuettes, quickly gave way to a wide plaza with multiple exits. The ultramarines, who spoke with warm camaraderie, took the western fork that would eventually lead them to the dock. Turning a corner at the lead of the two Astartes, Cestus was hit square in the chest. The impact, though surprising, moved the Astartes not at all. He stared down at what had struck him. Quivering amidst a bundle of tangled robes, a lithoslate clasped reassuringly in his hands, was a scholarly-looking human. "What is the meaning of this?" Antiguis demanded at once. The pale scholar cowered beneath the towering Astartes, shrinking before his obvious power. He was sweating profusely and used the sleeve of his robe to wipe his head before casting a glance back in the direction he had come from, in spite of the monolithic warriors in front of him. "Speak," Antiguis pressed. "Be temperate, my brother," Cestus counselled calmly, resting his hand lightly on Antiguis' shoulder pad. The gesture appeased the ultramarine, who backed down a little. "Tell us," Cestus urged the scholar gently. "Who are you, and what has put you in this distemper?"
"Tannhaut," the scholar said through ragged breaths. "Remembrancer Tannhaut. I only wanted to compose a saga of his deeds when a madness took him," he blathered. "He is a savage, I tell you."
Cestus exchanged an incredulous look with Antiguis, who turned back to fix the remembrancer with his imperious gaze once more. "What are you talking about?" Tannhaut pointed a quivering finger towards the arched entrance of a muster hall. A stylized rendering of a lupine head was etched into a stone panel beside it. Cestus frowned when he saw it, knowing full well who else was on the spaceport with them at that time.
"The Sons of Russ."
Antiguis groaned inwardly. "Gilliman, give us strength," he said, and the two ultramarines strode off in the direction of the muster hall, leaving Remembrancer Tannhaut quailing behind them. Bringar Sturmdreng's booming laughter echoed loudly around the muster hall as he felled another bloodclaw. "Come, whelplings," he bellowed, taking a long pull from the tankard in his hand. Most of the frothing brown liquid within spilled down his immense beard, which was bound in a series of intricate knots, and swept over the grey power armour of his legion. "I've yet to sharpen my fangs." In recognition of the fact, Bringar displayed a pair of long incisors in a feral grin. The blood claw Bringar had just knocked prone and half-conscious crawled groggily on his belly in a vain attempt to get clear of the ebullient wolf-guard. "We're not done yet, pups," Bringar said, clamping a massive armoured fist around the Bloodclaw's ankle and swinging him across the room one-handed to smash into what was left of the furnishings. The three Bloodclaws, left standing amongst the carnage of the broken chairs and tables and spilled drink and victuals, eyed the wolf-guard warily as they began to surround him. The two facing Bringar leapt in to attack, their shorter fangs bared. The wolf-guard drunkenly dodged the swipe of the first and hammered a brutal elbow into the Bloodclaw's gut. He took the punch of the second on his rock-hard chin before smashing him to the floor with his considerable bulk. A third Bloodclaw came from behind, but Bringar was ready and merely sidestepped, allowing the young warrior to overshoot before delivering a punishing uppercut into his cheek.
Never attack downwind, the bawdy Wolfguard told the Bloodclaw, rolling around on the floor. I'll always smell you coming, he added, tapping his flaring nostrils for emphasis. As for you, Bringar said, turning on the one who had struck him, you hit like you're from Macragge. The Wolfguard laughed out loud, before stomping a ceramite boot in mock salute of his triumph on top of the last Bloodclaw, who had yet to stir from unconsciousness. Is that so? A stern voice from the entranceway asked. Bringar swung his gaze in the direction of the speaker, and his one good eye brightened at once. A fresh challenge, he cried, swinging from his tankard and delivering a raucous belch. Come forth, Bringar said, beckoning. I think you've had enough. Then let us see. The Wolfguard gave a feral grin and stepped off the inert Bloodclaw. Tell me this, he added, stalking forward. Can you catch? Cestus hurled himself aside at the last moment as the broad-backed chair flew at him, smashing into splinters against the wall of the muster hall. When he looked up again, he saw a broad and burly Wolfguard coming towards him. The Astartes was an absolute brute, his grey power armour wreathed in pelts and furs, numerous fangs and other feral fetishes hanging from silver chains. He wore no helmet, his long and ragged hair swathed in sweat, together with a beard drenched in wolf's mead, swaying freely about his thick shoulders. "Stay back," Cestus advised Antigues as he hauled himself to his feet. "Be my guest," the other ultramarine replied from his prone position. Adopting a crouching stance, as dictated by the fighting regimen of Reboot Gilliman, Cestus rushed towards the Space Wolf. Bringar lunged at the ultramarine, who barely dodged the sudden attack. Using his low posture to sweep under and around the blow, Cestus rammed a quick forearm smash into the Space Wolf's elbow, tipping the rest of what was in the tankard over his face. Bringar roared and came at the ultramarine with renewed vigour. Cestus ducked the clumsy two-armed bear hug aimed at him and used Bringar's momentum to trip the Space Wolf hard onto his rump. The manoeuvre almost worked, but Bringar turned out of his trip, casting aside the empty tankard and using his free hand to support his body. He twisted, using the momentum to carry him, and landed a fierce punch to Cestus's midriff when he came back too swiftly for the ultramarine to block. An overhand blow followed as Bringar sought to chain his attacks, but Cestus moved out of the striking arc and unleashed a fearsome uppercut that sent Bringar hurtling backwards. With the sound of more crushed furniture, the Space Wolf got to his feet, but Cestus was already on him, pressing his advantage. He rained 3 quick, flat-handed strikes against Bringar's nose, ear, and solar plexus. Staggered after the barrage, the Wolfguard was unable to respond as Cestus drove forward and hooked both arms around his torso. Using the weight of the attack to propel him, Cestus roared and flung Bringar bodily across the muster hall into a tall stack of barrels. As he moved backwards, Cestus watched as the rack holding the barrels came loose, and they crashed down on top of Bringar. "Had enough?" Cestus asked through heaving breaths. Dazed and defeated, and covered in foaming wolf's mead, a brew native to Fenris and so potent that it could render an Astartes insensible should he drink enough, Bringar looked up at the victorious ultramarine and smiled, showing his fangs. "There are worse ways to lose a fight," he said, wringing out his beard and supping the wolf's meat squeezed from it. Antigues, standing alongside his fellow battle-brother, made a face. "Up you get," said Cestus, hauling Bringar to his feet. "Fair greeting, Cestus," said the Wolfguard when he was up, crushing Cestus in a mighty bear hug. "And to you, Antigues," he added. The other ultramarine backed away a step and nodded. Bringar put his arms down and nodded back with a broad smile. "It has been a while, lads." It was on Carthis, during an uprising of the Cobalite Empire in the early years of the Crusade, that the 3 Astartes had first fought together. Bringar had saved Cestus's life that day and had been blinded in one eye for his trouble. The venerable wolf had fought the Colobite Drone King single-handed.
The mighty rune axe, Felltooth, which Bringar wielded to this day, had part of its blade forged from the creature's mandible claw by the rune priests and artificers of Fenris in recognition of the deed. "Indeed it has, my noble friend," said Cestus. "Drunk and brawling. Are the drinking holes of this spaceport insufficient sport, Bringar? Did you build this muster hall for just such a purpose, I wonder?" said Antiges, with a hint of reproach. Lacquered wood panelled the walls, and a plentiful cache of barrels filled with wolf's mead were stationed at intervals throughout the hall. Huge, long tables and stout wooden benches filled the place, which was empty except for Bringar and the groaning bloodclaws. Tapestries of the deeds of Fenris swathed the walls. The muster halls of the Ultramarines were austere and regimented. This one, fashioned by the artisans of Leman Russ's legion, looked more like a rustic longhouse from the inside. "A pity you could not have joined in sooner," Bringar remarked. "Perhaps tomorrow." "With regret we must decline," Cestus replied, secretly relieved. He had no desire to go a second round with the burly space wolf. "We leave today for Ultramar. War is brewing in the Veridon system, and we are to be reunited with our brothers in order to prosecute it. We are heading to the space dock now." Bringar smiled broadly, clapping both Astartes on the shoulder, who both felt the impact through their armor. "Then there is only one thing for it." Antige's expression was suspicious. "What is that?" "I shall come to see you off." With that, the wolf guard turned the two Ultramarines, and putting his massive arms around their shoulders, proceeded to walk them out of the muster hall. "What about them?" Cestus asked as they were leaving, indicating the battered bloodclaws. Bringar cast a quick look over his shoulder and made a dismissive gesture. "Oh, they've had enough excitement." Chapter 3. God of the Furious Abyss. Psychic Scream. Visions of Home. Coralis Dock was one of many on Vangelis. A wide, flat plain of plate metal stretched out from its many station houses and listening spires, ending in a trio of fanged docking clamps where the various visiting craft could make harbour and take on or drop off cargo. Arriving at the main control hub of Coralis, the three Astartes found themselves in a tight chamber that overlooked the dock. Thick, interwoven cables looped from the ceiling, and dim, flickering halogen globes illuminated the bent-backed menials and cogitator servitors working the hub. A backwash of sickly yellow light thrown from numerous pict screens and data displays fought weakly against the gloom. An azure holosphere was located in the centre of the chamber, rotating above a gunmetal dais. It depicted Vangelis spaceport in grainy, intermittent resolution and a wide arc surveyor net that projected several thousand meters from the surface. A large convex viewport confronted the Astartes at the far wall, through which they could see the magnificent vista of real space. Distantly, writhing nebulae patterned the infinite blackness with their iridescent glory and fading suns. Star fields and other galactic phenomena were arrayed like the flora and fauna of some endless obsidian ocean. It was a breathtaking view, and stole away the fact that the recycled air within the control hub was sickly and stifling. A machine drone accompanied it from the spaceport's primary reactor located in the subterranean catacombs of Vangelis. The insistent hum of latent power could be felt through the reinforced plasteel floor. It was hot, too, the stark industrial interior barely shielded against the dock's generatorium. Saphrax was already on the command deck of the control hub, consulting with the hub station master when the other Astartes arrived. Saphrax was the Honor Guard Squad standard-bearer, and the Ultramarines' honor banner was rolled up in its case, slung over his back. The rest of Saphrax's battle brothers were below at the hub's gate, preparing for their imminent departure. "Greetings, Saphrax. You know Bringar of the Space Wolves," said Cestus, indicating the brutish wolf guard, who gave a feral snarl. "What news?" the brother sergeant asked his banner-bearer. "Captain, Antiges," said the Ultramarine to his battle brothers. "Son of Russ," he added for Bringar's benefit. Saphrax was a bald-headed warrior with a long scar that ran from his left temple to the base of his chin, another souvenir from the Colobite. Cestus often mused that none in the Legion were as straight-backed as Saphrax, so much so that he seemed permanently at attention. Dependable and solid, he was seldom given to great emotion, and wore a stern expression like a mask over chiselled stone features. Pragmatic, even melancholic, he was the third element to the balance that existed between Cestus and Antiges. Even so, the banner-bearer's mood was particularly dour. "We have received an astropathic message," Saphrax informed them. There were 3 astropaths in residence at the hub, and more in the spaceport at large. They were sunk into a deep, circular vestibule just below floor level and swathed in shadow. Dim lights set into the edge of the vestibule cast weak illumination onto their faintly writhing forms. A skin of translucent, psychically conditioned material was draped over the trio of astropaths like a clinging veil. Beneath it, they looked like they were somehow conjoined, as if feeling each other's emotions as one being. Other, less obvious wards were also in place. All were designed to safeguard against the dangerous mental energies that could be unleashed during the course of their duties. Withered and blinded, the wretched creatures, 2 males and a female, like all of their calling, had undergone the soul-binding ritual, the means by which the Emperor moulded and steeled their minds so that they might be able to look into the warp and not be driven insane. Astropaths were vital to the function of the Imperium. Without them, messages could not be communicated over vast distances, and forces could not be readied and coordinated. Even so, it was an inexact science. Messages both sent and received by the Astra Telepathica were often naught but a string of images and vague sense impressions. Wires and thick cables snaked from the vestibule, slaving the astropaths to the control hub where their messages could be logged and interpreted.
"It started 15 minutes ago," said the station master, an elderly veteran of the Imperial Army, with cables running from under his shaved scalp, plugged into the command ports of the consoles set above the astropathic chamber. "We've only received fragments of meaning so far. All we know for certain is that they come from a distant source. Thus far, only part of the message has reached us. Our astropaths are endeavouring to extract the rest as I speak to you."
Cestus turned to regard the station master, and in turn the gibbering astropaths. Beneath the protective skin, he could see their wasted bodies, swaddled in ragged robes. He heard the hissing of sibilant non-sequiturs. The astropaths drooled spittle as they spoke, their sputum collecting against the inner material of the skin enveloping them. Their bone-like fingers were twitching as their minds attempted to infiltrate the Imperium.
"Falkman, sire," said the station master by way of introduction with a shallow bow.
His right leg was augmetic, and, judging by his awkward movements, most of his right side, which was probably why he had been sidelined to age and atrophy at Vangelis, no longer fit to taste of the Imperium's glory on the battlefield. Cestus pitied his fragility, and that of all non-Astartes.
"Could it be a distress beacon sent from a ship?" Antiges broke through Cestus's thoughts with his assertive questioning. "We have been unable to discern that yet, sire, but it is unlikely," said Falkman, his face darkening as he turned to Saphrax.
The nature of the message was broken, more like a psychic cry delivered with extreme force. With a warp in tumult, the energy used to send it was unpredictable, said Saphrax, and it was no beacon. There was a single message, but the pattern does not repeat. We think perhaps it was an astropathic death scream. And that is not all. Cestus's gaze was questioning. Saphrax's face was grim. We have yet to receive word from the Fist of Macragge. The banner-bearer of the Honor Guard let the words hang there, unwilling to voice what was implied. I will not make any negative conclusions. Cestus replied quietly, unwilling to give in to what he feared. We must believe that... The three astropaths, slave to the control hub, began convulsing as the full force of the psychic scream made its presence felt. Blood spurted inside the skin covering them, and looked hazy and bright viewed from outside it. The wasted limbs of the astropaths pressed against the material, forcing it tight, their muscles held in spasm as they writhed in agony. Cogitators set around the hub above them were spewing reams of data as the astropaths fought to control the visions rushing into their minds. Smoke clouded the already hazy interior of the skin as it rose from their decrepit bodies. console sparked and exploded as wrathful electricity arced and spat. It earthed into the wizened frames of the astropaths, carried by the wires and cables, now little more than human conductors for its power. As one, they threw their heads back, and a backwash of pure psychic force was unleashed in a terrible death scream that resonated throughout the room. The astropaths became a conduit for it, the strength of the psychic emission made many times more powerful by the volatile state of the warp. Walls shuddering against the onslaught, the lights of Vangelis spaceport went out. The bridge of the furious abyss was like a sprawling city in miniature. The banks of cogitators were like hive stacks rising above the streets formed by the exposed industrial ironwork of the deck. The various bridge crews sat in sunken command posts like arenas or deep harbours. 3 view screens dominated one end of the bridge, while a raised acropolis at its heart was formed by the captain's post. A stratagem table stretched out before it, from which he could raise an orrery display showing the ship and its foes, wrought in rotating brass rings. High above the sprawling bridge was a decked clerestory, where the astropathic choir of the mighty warship was slaved. The vaulted space was shared by the navigator's sanctum, concealed in an antechamber so as to be secluded, whilst traversing the perils of the warp. The command throne, raised upon a hard-edged pentagonal dais, was the seat of a god. Zadkiel was that god, looking down upon a city devoted to him. "Listen!" Zadkiel bade those kneeling before him in supplication. The dulcet roar of the furious abyss's plasma engines, even dulled by the thick adamantium plating surrounding the ship's hull and interior, was like a war cry. "Listen and hear the sound of the future." Zadkiel was on his feet, sermonizing. "The sound of fate." 3 warriors, true devotees of the word, heeded Zadkiel's rhetoric and stood. "We pledge our service to you, Lord Zadkiel," said the tallest of the 3. He had a voice like crushed gravel, and one of his eyes was blood red, surrounded by a snarl of scar tissue. Even without the injury, his granite slab of a face would have made him a figure of fear even among his fellow word-bearers. This was Belanus, assault captain and Zadkiel's private terror weapon. A potent warrior, Belanus lacked imagination, which made him the perfect follower in Zadkiel's eyes. He was obedient, deadly, and fiercely loyal, all fine qualities in an underling. "As do we all," Ichthalon interjected blithely. Another Astartes, Ichthalon was a company chaplain, demagogue, and expert torturer. Unlike Berenos, he wore his helmet in the presence of his commander, a skull-faced piece of armour with a pair of discreet horns on either side of the temple. Even through it, Ichthalon's thinly veiled contempt was obvious. "Perhaps we should address the matters at hand, brother," he counselled, lingering sarcastically on the last word. Zadkiel sat back down in the command throne. It was sculpted to accept his armoured frame, as if it had been born to take command of this bridge, to be the god of this warship. "Then let us tarry no further," he said, his viperous gaze lingering on Ichthalon. "Sensorium reports that the Fist of Macragge was destroyed, and all weapon systems tested successfully, sire." It was Reskiel who spoke. He was a youth compared to the other Astartes on the command dais, gaunt of face, with a keening hunger in his black eyes, a strange quirk of his birth. Reskiel was a veteran of many battles despite his age, and he wore the newly fashioned studded armour of his legion proudly, keen to baptize it with the scars of war. He was widely regarded as Zadkiel's second, if not in an official capacity. That honour fell to Belanus, and made it his business to know all the happenings aboard the furious abyss and report them to his master. Where Belanus was the dutiful lapdog, Reskiel was the eager sycophant. "It was as expected." Zadkiel's response was terse. "Indeed," said Ichthalon, "but our astropaths also suggest that the stricken ship, though smitten by our righteous fury, managed to send out a distress call. I would not like to think that all our caution at commissioning the vessel's construction in the Jovian shipyards has been undone so swiftly and needlessly." Zadkiel allowed a flutter of emotion to cross his features for a moment at the news. He considered drawing his power mace and staving in Ichthalong's skull for his persistent insubordination, but in truth he valued the chaplain's counsel and his word. Though he was a barb in Zadkiel's side, even since the Great Crusade had been in its infancy, he did not couch expressions with sycophantic frippery, as Reskiel was prone to, nor was he so single-minded that he was unable to convey subtlety and the need for delicacy when required, like Balanos. Zadkiel did not trust him, but he trusted his word, and so he was tolerated. "It is possible that a message reached a way station or some isolated listening spire at the edge of the segmentum. But we are well underway, and there is little that any vessel can do to prevent our destiny. So it is written," Zadkiel said at last. "So it is written," the assembled commanders intoned. "Reskiel, you will maintain a close watch on the sensorium. If anything should stray into surveyor range, I want to know immediately," Zadkiel ordered. "It will be done, my lord." Reskiel bowed obsequiously and retreated from the dais. "Belanus, Ichthalon, you have your own duties to attend to," Zadkiel added dismissively, not waiting to watch them depart as he turned to regard the view screens before him. "Engines," said Zadkiel, and at once the central view screen blinked into life, the bridge lights dimmed, and the image on the screen lit the miniature city in hard moonlight. It showed the Furious Abyss's cavernous engine room, the prostrate cylinders of the plasma reactors dwarfing the crewmen who scrabbled around them in their routine duties. The crew wore the deep crimson of the word-bearers. They were servants of Lorgar just as the word-bearers were, devoted to the Primarch's word and grateful for such a certain place in the universe. They did not know the details of the word, of course. They were ignorant of the web of allegiances and oaths that Lorgar had created among his brother Primarchs, or of the mission that would seal the inevitability of the word-bearers' victory. They did not need to know. It was enough for them that they laboured under the wishes of their Primarch. Amongst the piteous menials, a tall figure stood out. Looming from the darkness, he was swathed in black robes and bore the cog symbol of the Mechanicum around his neck on a chain of bolts. "Magos Guriod, you are to keep us at a steady speed, but be ready to increase our plasma engines to maximum capacity." "It will be done," the Magos replied, his artificial voice relayed through a series of synthesizers. Guriod's face was hidden by the massive cowl over his head, but a pair of blinking red diodes was vaguely discernible in the void where his eyes should have been. Odd protrusions in the sweep of his long robes suggested further augmetics, and his withered hands, crossed over his abdomen, offered the only clue that Magos Guriod was indeed human. At the order, he withdrew into the shadows again, doubtless heading for the sanctum and deep communion with a machine spirit. Turning to another screen, Zadkiel uttered, "Ordnance." The crowded munitions deck was displayed there. Weapon Master Malforion was in residence, barking harsh commands to crews of sweating orderlies and gang ratings, toiling in the steam-filled half-dark of the cluttered deck. Full ranks of torpedoes stood, gleaming, fresh from the Martian forges. The ordnance deck stretched across the breadth of the Furious Abyss beneath the prow, and like the rest of the ship it was wrought in a bare industrial style that had an elegance of its own. Realizing he was being summoned, Malforion attended to his captain at once. "Keep broadsides primed and at ready status, Master Malforion," Zadkiel instructed him. "The test against the Fist of Macragge was to your satisfaction? Yes?" "Yes, my lord. Your will shall be done." The lower portion of the weaponmaster's face was supplanted by a metal grill, and he spoke in a tinny monotone as a result. Most of his jaw and chin had been destroyed during the early days of the Great Crusade while he was aboard the Galthalamor, fighting the Orchords of the Eastern Fringe. The vessel, an ancient Retribution-class battlecruiser, was all but annihilated in the conflict. Zadkiel dismissed the weapons master and blanked the pict screens. Coding a sequence into his command throne, Zadkiel felt the hydraulic pistons at work in the dais as he was slowly, majestically raised above the bridge and brought level with a massive viewport overlooking the vessel's prow. The endless expanse of real space stretched beyond it. Somewhere within that curtain of stars was Macragge, home world of Guilliman's Legion. It was the stage of his destiny. "Navigate to Esthymia," said Zadkiel, staring into the infinite. "My lord?" A female voice chimed through the vox set into the command throne. "Take us to Macragge." "Vectors are locked, Captain," Esthemir informed him from the secluded cocoon in the clerestory, a hard-edged blister that was surrounded by spines of data medium like the spires of a cathedral. Zadkiel nodded, turning to face the view screen in front of him as the navigator went to her duties. The infinite gaped before him, and Zadkiel was acutely aware of the power that lay beyond the veil of real space and the pacts he had made to harness its limitless strength. Before the countenance of his enemies, aboard this mighty vessel, he would be godlike. There was no other ship in existence that could do what the Furious Abyss was destined to do. It alone had the power to achieve the mission that Cor Phaeron had charged them with. Only the Furious Abyss could get close enough, could endure the awesome defenses of Macragge, to unleash its deadly payload. Icons in his command throne lit up with the acquisition of their new heading, bathing Zadkiel in an aura of his own personal heaven. "Like a god," he whispered. Every emergency klaxon had gone off at once in the control hub of Coralis Dock at Vangelis Spaceport. Cestus could barely hear the thoughts in his head. Light flickered sporadically from the warning readouts on every command surface, casting the darkened control hub like some monochromatic animation. The astropathic choir bucked and kicked and spat blood beneath the psi skin in a collective seizure. "Station Captain, report!" bellowed Cestus. Falkman was reeling, trying to tear the cables from his skull as they pumped a screaming torrent of information into his mind. Bringar went to the side of the human at once, preventing Falkman from ripping out more cables, determined that the station master would do his duty.
"The hub reactor is overloading,"
the station captain snarled through gritted teeth, trying desperately to hold on.
"The psychic jolt must have started a chain reaction in our electrical systems. The reactor must be shut down, or it will destabilize."
Cestus's face, lit up intermittently in readout flares and the bursts of warning strobes, held a question.
"The resulting explosion will vaporize the station, this dock, and all of us."
The ultramarine captain turned to the assembled Astartes in the control hub. "Saphrax, stay here and maintain control over the situation," he ordered with a meaningful glance at Falkman. "Try to salvage whatever you're able to from the astropathic choir." "But my captain—" "Do it!" Cestus would not be argued with, even with a battle brother so seldom disposed to querying orders as Saphrax. "Whatever was in that message was important. I can feel it in my very marrow. It must be recovered." "What of the rest of us?" asked Antiges, barely registering the flying embers of sparks spitting across the chamber. "We're going to save the dock."
"You are no-tech marine. How do you plan on shutting down the reactor?"
Bringar shouted against the din, sparks showering him from cogitator cables above. Although the Space Wolf's face was almost next to Cestus's ear, the ultramarine could only just hear him. The droning reactor was a thunderous pulse in the subterranean access tunnels. After verbally guiding the Astartes to an antechamber below the control hub and a reinforced access portal that would lead them to the reactor, Falkman had neglected to provide them with the necessary instruction to shut the device down, the fact of his passing out from shock a major contributing factor to the oversight. Usually, this area of the dock would be thronging with menials and engineers, but the rapid outflow of escape reactor radiation had prompted an evacuation alert. The Astartes had passed a number of fleeing tech adepts as they'd made their way down to the reactor. Those that were left were either dead or critically injured. The Astartes ignored them all, immune to their pleas for help with the safety of the entire dock at stake. "I am hoping a solution will present itself," Cestus replied as they made their way through the cramped tunnel. The corridor the Astartes were in spiraled around the main reactor shell down to the power source at the base of the station.
"To think the Legion of Gilliman are regarded as master strategists,"
said Bringar with bellowing laughter.
"Directness is a valid strategy, Space Wolf,"
Antiges reminded him, shouting to be heard above the horrendous noise of lurching metal, as if an inner storm was at play within the conduit.
"I would have thought one of the sons of Russ would find it familiar."
Bringar's amused response was raucous and deafening. Shouldering past the last of the surviving crewmen, and panicked tech adepts as they fled, Cestus led the Astartes to the reactor chamber. Only one of the Emperor's angels, replete in his power armor, could hope to survive the reactor's intense radiation at such close range. Like his battle brothers, Cestus had donned his helmet before entering the tunnel. Extreme radiation warning icons flashed insistently in the lens display. Time was running out. Atmospheric pipes fractured and sprayed freezing gas across a pair of gargantuan blast doors, closing off the interior of the reactor shell from the rest of the station. Doubtless, they'd been activated as soon as the psychic power surge from the astropaths had hit. The servos on the massive door had shorted and were a tangled mass of wires and machinery. "Prepare yourselves!" cried Cestus, ignoring the sub-zero gas. He seized the edge of the blast door in an effort to prise it open. "Stand back!" snarled Bringar, using his bulk to muscle the ultramarine aside. He hefted Feldtooth with practiced ease, sweeping the rune axe around in a lazy arc. "No sport when the enemy stays still," he growled, and split the blast door in two with one mighty swing, sparks cascading from the blade. Stowing the weapon, Bringar peeled back the rent metal with both hands, making a space wide enough for the Astartes to enter. The reactor was a swirling mass of glowing blue-green energy, rippling in on itself as it drew in power from the plasma conduits looping around it like eccentric orbits around a star. It pulsed, streaked with black and purple, and chunks of scorched machinery tumbled into it. A hot blast of air, tingling with radiation, washed over them in a backdraft. More warning runes flickered against Cestus's helmet lens, transmitted through onto the display from the acute sensor readouts on his armor. "Now what?" shouted Antiges above the howl of the reactor. Cestus watched the writhing mass of energy, taking in the confines of the small chamber that housed it and the control console, all but destroyed by its wrath. "How many charges do you have?" "A cluster of fragmentation and 3 crack grenades, but I don't understand, Captain," Antiges replied, his perplexity concealed by his helmet. "A full belt of crack," Bringar growled. "Whatever are you planning, lad? We'd best be about it," he added. Being blown to smithereens by a malfunctioning reactor was not the death saga he wanted for his epitaph. "We prime the chamber with set charges, everything we've got," said Cestus with growing conviction, "and bury it." "That would cause catastrophic damage to the station," Antiges countered, turning to regard his captain. "Yes, but it would not destroy it," said Cestus. "There is no other choice." Cestus was about to detach the grenades from his clip harness when the reactor abruptly collapsed like a dying star imploding into a black hole. In its place, a glowing sphere of deep purple blossomed, flickering like an image on a faulty pict screen. Purple lightning licked from the surface, playing over Cestus's armor. He took a step back. Yowling static flared suddenly into life, and the Astartes were floored by the wave of noise. A bright flash lit the entire chamber, overloading their helmet arrays in an instant. There, amidst the intense flare of light, Cestus saw an image so fleeting and indistinct that it could have been an illusion from the overwhelmed optics in his helmet. He blinked once, seeing only white haze, and shook his head, trying to recapture it. The flare died down, and when Cestus's vision returned, the afterglow haunted the edge of his retinas, but the image was gone, and the reactor was dead. The core had turned dark. Cracks of static electricity glowed over its surface. It shrank and became abruptly inert. The warning lights inside the reactor shell dimmed and went out. Elsewhere on the station, secondary and tertiary reactors, registering the loss of the primary reactor, diverted power to the dock, allowing the Texiers time to make the necessary repairs. The storm had howled itself out. "What in the name of terror just happened?" asked Antiges, a cluster of frag grenades still in his hand. "Mother Fenris," Bringar breathed at what he had just witnessed. "Did you see that?" asked Cestus. "Did you see it in the blast flare?" "See what?" Antiges replied, relieved that they didn't have to collapse the reactor chamber after all. Cestus's posture displayed his shock and disbelief, as sure as any facial expression disguised by his armor. "Macragge." Shards of broken images flashed on the psi receiver, what was left of the astropathic transference from the psychic scream. Folkman, looking gaunt and haggard from his earlier experience, but otherwise intact, pored over them, running analysis protocols and clarity procedures with what little machinery still worked in the hub. Saphrax stood pensively beside him, awaiting the return of his captain. "Brother Captain," he said with no small amount of relief as Cestus and the others emerged from the tunnel, their armour scorched black in several places. When Cestus removed his helmet, his face was ashen, and a cold sweat dappled his brow. Saphrax was taken aback. He had never seen a fellow Astartes, certainly not his captain, look so afflicted. "The astropathic message," Cestus stated coldly, going to the psi receiver before Saphrax could verbalize his concern. "What's left of it?" "All is well, brother," said Antiges, following in his captain's wake and placing his hand on the banner-bearer's shoulder, though his tone was anything but reassuring. Bringar waited further back, deliberately distancing himself, and stony silent, as if processing what had happened in the reactor. He touched a fang totem attached to his cuirass with an inward expression. "There is little left," confessed Folkman, who, though he had managed to restore lighting and some of the basic functions of the hub, had failed to recover the entire astropathic message. "I need to get one of the logic engines functioning if I'm to decipher it with any degree of certitude. But this is what we have." Cestus glared at the picked slate of the psi receiver as the broken images cycled slowly. A gauntleted fist wreathed in a laurel of steel. A golden book, what appeared to be the hull of a ship, and a cluster of indistinct stars. Cestus knew of a fifth image, though his rational mind told him otherwise. In his heart, the ultramarine knew what he had seen. The range of mountains, the lustrous green and blue, it was unmistakable. He also knew what he had felt, a sense of belonging, like coming home. "Macragge," he whispered, and felt suddenly cold. Chapter 4. Divine Inspiration. A Gathering. Contact. Motep stared into the water. So still and clear its surface was like silver. The face that stared back at him had hard and chiseled features with a handsome bone structure, despite the velvet cowl that partly concealed it. Hooded eyes spoke of intelligence, and skin so tan and smooth that it was utterly without imperfection suggested the nature of his legion, the 1,000 Suns. Motep was dressed in iridescent robes that pooled like deep red liquid around him as he knelt with head bowed. Stitched in runes, his attire suggested the arcane. He was at the heart of his private sanctum. The ellipse-shaped chamber had a low ceiling that enhanced the sense of claustrophobia created by the sheer volume of esoteric paraphernalia within. Stacks of scroll cases and numerous shelves, replete with well-thumbed archaic tomes, warred for space with crisp-glass cabinets filled with bizarre arcana. An oculum of many-hued lenses, a bejeweled gauntlet, a plain silver mask fashioned into an ersatz skull. Upon a raised dais there was a planetarium in miniature, rendered from gold, the stellar bodies represented by gemstones. Gilt-panelled walls were swathed in ancient charts in burnished metal frames, cast in the azure glow of eldritch lamps. A red marble floor stretched across the entire room, engraved with myriad paths of interlocking and concentric circles. Runes of onyx and jet, etched into the stone, punctuated the sweeping arcs without regularity. Motep was at the nexus of the design, at the point where all of the interweaving circles converged. A chime registered in a voximeter built into the sanctum's entry system indicated a guest. "Enter, Calamar," said Motep. A hiss of escaping pressure accompanied the aid as the door to the sanctum opened and he shuffled into the room. "How did you know it was I, Lord Motep?" asked Calamar, his speech fraught with age and decrepitude. "Who else would it be, old friend? I do not need the prescience of Magnus to predict your presence in my sanctum." Motep bent towards the bowl, plunging both hands into the water to lightly splash his face. As he came back up, he withdrew his cowl, and the lamplight reflected from his bald scalp. "And I need no sophisticated augury to divine that you bring important news either. Motep added, dabbing his face with his sleeve. "Of course, sire, I meant no offence," said Calamar, bowing acutely. The serf was blind and wore ocular implants. The augmetic biosensors built into his eye cavities could not see as such, but detected heat and provided limited spatial awareness. Calamar supplemented his somewhat unorthodox visual affliction with a silvered cane. "My lord, we have docked at Vangelis," he added finally, confirming what his captain already knew. Motep nodded, as if possessed of sudden understanding. "Have the Legion serfs prepare my armor. We are leaving the ship at once." "As you wish," Calamar said, bowing again, but as he was retreating from the sanctum he paused. "My lord, please do not think me impertinent, but why have we docked here at Vangelis when our journey's end lies at Prospero?" "The paths of destiny are curious, Calamar," Motep replied, looking back down at the bowl. "Yes, my lord." Even after over 50 years in his service, Calamar did not fully understand his master's cryptic words. When the Legion serf had gone, Motep rose to his feet, his voluminous robes gathering up around him. From within the folds of his sleeves, he produced a stave-like object, no longer than his forearm, and covered in arcane sigils. Stepping away from the circle, a single eye was revealed at its center as he took a bizarre course through the labyrinthine design of the room. It represented the wisdom of Magnus, Primarch of the Thousand Sons Legion and Gene-Father to Motep. Locked in his Kabbalistic route, Motep arrived at an ornate, lozenge-shaped vessel and reverently placed the stave within it. The vessel was much like a gilded sarcophagus, similar to that in which the rulers of ancient Prospero had once been entombed. The item secured, Motep sealed the vessel shut, a vacuum hiss of escaping pressure emitting from its confines, and inputted a rune sequence disguised within the sarcophagus's outer decoration. "Yes," uttered Motep, the task done, absently caressing a scarab-shaped earring. "Very curious." "It's a low turnout," muttered Antigues beneath his breath. Within the stark grey ferrocrete austerity of the Ultramarines' muster hall, 3 Astartes awaited Cestus and his battle brothers. The 3 were seated around a conference table inset with a single arcing U. A huge tapestry depicting the auspicious day when the Emperor came to Macragge in search of one of his sons framed the scene. Clad in glorious armor of gold, a shining halo about his patrician features, the Emperor stretched out his hand to a kneeling Raboot Gilliman, who reached out to claim it. That day, their Primarch had been truly born, and their Legion's inception cemented. Even now, and rendered as mere artistry, Cestus could not help but feel his heart lift. "With such short notice, I had expected less," the Ultramarine confessed, approaching the gathering with Antigues. Cestus's battle brother had briefed his captain on the attendees. Bringar he knew, of course, but the 2 others, a Thousand Son and a World Eater, he did not. Cestus and Antigues were joined by 4 more of their brothers, Lexinal, Piteron, Excelinor, and Mora, for the sake of appearances. The rest, Amrix, Leradis, and Festor, were with Saphrax on a separate duty. The Ultramarines had called the gathering, so it was only proper that they arrived at it in force, to show their commitment. "Greetings, brothers," Cestus began, taking his seat alongside his fellow Ultramarines. "You have the gratitude of Gilliman and the 8th Legion for your attendance here this day." "As is well," said a bald-headed Astartes with richly tanned skin. "But we beseech you to illuminate us as to your plight." His voice was deep and powerful. Clad in the panoply of the Thousand Sons Legion, a suit of lacquered dark red and gold power armor, as angular and proud as the monuments of Prospero, he cut an intimidating figure. Antigues had already informed Cestus that the Thousand Son was Fleet Captain Motep. Darkly handsome, bereft of the usual battle scars and functional facial bionics wrought by years of unremitting warfare, this Motep had a curious, aloof air. His shining eyes seemed to bore into Cestus's very soul. Not all of the assembly were so respectful of his obvious power. "The great wolf values silence over idle chatter, so that he might heed wise words otherwise lost in needless interrogation," snarled Bringar. The animosity he felt towards the son of Magnus obvious. It was the Wolf Guard, already pledged to Cestus's cause, together with Antiges, that had summoned the legions on Vangelis to this meeting. They had done so with passion and curt request, divulging little of what Cestus needed of them. The Space Wolf had at first railed against the inclusion of the 1,000 Sons to be their potential sword brothers in this deed. The conflicting character of the two legions did not lend itself to a ready accord, but Cestus had reasoned that they needed every soul, and Motep had answered the call. What was more, he also had his own ship, a fact that only served to bolster the small fleet he was trying to assemble. The captain of 1,000 Sons ignored the Space Wolf's thinly veiled insult and leant back in his chair with a gesture for Cestus to proceed. The Ultramarine's captain told the assembly of his squad's scheduled extraction from Vangelis by the Fist of Macragge and of the astropathic message that had very nearly wrecked the control hub of Corralis Dock. He even confided in them his fears that some unknown enemy had destroyed the ship, but he did not mention his experience in the reactor core. Cestus was still processing what he had seen. Visions were the province of sorcery, and to divulge that he, an Ultramarine, had witnessed one would undermine his credibility and arouse suspicion as to his motives. "Perhaps this deed was committed by an alien ship. Orculks have been fought and crushed by my legion as far as the Segmentum Solar," said a voice like iron. Skral was a World-Eater, an Astartes of the 12th Legion, and the third of the invited warriors, including Bringar. He wore battered Mark V power armor, rendered in chipped blue and white, the colours of his legion, clearly eschewing the Corvus pattern suits worn by his battle brothers. The armor was heavily dented in several places, sporting numerous replacement parts, and the battlefield repair work was obvious. Formed of basic materials, the plates were held together by spikes, the manifest studs clearly visible on the left pauldron, greaves, and gorget. The helmet rested on the table next to the warrior. It was similarly adorned and bore a fearsome aspect of blade and ballistic damage that revealed bare grey metal beneath. Skral's face was the mirror of his armor, cross-hatching scar tissue a mapwork of pain and suffering. A thick vein across his forehead throbbed as he spoke. His bellicose demeanour, coupled with a nervous tic beneath his right eye, gave him the outward appearance of being unhinged. The World-Eaters were a fearsome legion. Much like their Primarch Angron, they were a primal force that fought with fury and wrath as their weapons. Each and every warrior was a font of rage and barely checked collar, bloody echoes of the battle-lust of their Primarch. "That is possible," said Cestus, deliberately holding the gruesome warrior's gaze, despite Skral's obvious belligerence. "What is certain is that a ship of the Emperor's Astartes has been attacked by enemies unknown, and for some nefarious purpose," he continued with building anger, and got to his feet. "This act cannot go unreckoned." "Then what would you have us do, noble son of Gilliman?" asked Motep, ever the epitome of calm. Cestus spread his hands across the table, laying his palms flat as he regained his composure. Astropathic decryption revealed a region of space that has been identified by the station's astrocartographer. I believe this is where the Fist of Macragge met its end. I also believe that since the ship was headed for the Calth system and a rendezvous with my Lord Gilliman, it is possible that their attacker was heading in the same direction. "A substantial leap of logic, Ultramarine," Motep countered, unconvinced by Cestus's impassioned arguments. "I cannot believe that the very ship carrying 5 companies of my battle brothers and en route to Calth was destroyed before reaching Vangelis in a random act of Xenos contrition."
Almost 3,000 players online.
"How are we to find this Slayer vessel, then?" asked Skral, thumbing the hilt of his chain axe, the urge for carnage obvious.
And yes, if you're still here, man like Mango, the server is really nice. Active developers.
He wished dearly that he could make his brothers see what was in his heart, what he knew in his gut. For now, though, he dared not, at least not until he could make some sense of what he'd seen. There was no time for delay. Our position on Vangelis bisects the route of the Fist of Macragge, the route it would have taken to Calth. In short, it is ahead of the site of its demise. If we make ready at once, it is possible we may be able to catch the enemy's trail. Silent faces regarded him. Even Bringar did not look certain of the Ultramarine's reasoning. Cestus realized that it was not logic that guided him on this course, but instinct and inner belief. The image of Macragge, seen for an instant in the flash of the reactor, burned fresh in his mind, and he spoke. "I do not need your aid in this venture. I have already sent one of my battle brothers to commandeer a vessel from this very station, and I will take it to the site of the first of Macragge's last transmission. With luck, we can pick up a trail to follow and find whoever is responsible for what happened to it. No, I do not need your aid, but I ask for it. Humbly," he added, pushing the seat back and kneeling reverently before his fellow Astartes, with head bowed. Antiges was aghast at first, but then he too left the table and kneeled. The other ultramarines followed his lead, and soon all 6 of Gilliman's sons were genuflecting before the rest of the council. "The sons of Rust do not refuse an honoured debt," said Bringar, getting to his feet and laying Felltooth upon the table. "I will join you in this endeavour." Skral stood next and set his chain-axe with the Space Wolf's runeblade. "The fury of the World-Eaters is at your side." "What say you, son of Magnus?" Bringar growled, his savage gaze falling upon Motep. For a moment the 1,000 Sons sat in calm reflection, considering his answer. He laid his ornate scimitar with the other weapons, its gilded blade humming with power as he unsheathed it. "My ship and I are at your disposal, Ultramarine." "This council's greatest opponent, I should like to know why," said Bringar. Motep smirked with amusement at the Space Wolf's rancour, but refused to be baited. "You all know of the events at Nicaea concerning my Primarch and Legion, and the sanctions placed upon us that day," the 1,000 Sons said plainly. "I am keen to foster improved relations with my fellow legions, and where better to start than the vaunted sons of Rabut Gilliman?" Motep nodded respectfully at the final remark, a deliberately weak attempt to cover the slight. Cestus cared little for the discord between the 2 Astartes, and arose, Antiges following his example. "You do me great service this day," Cestus said with genuine humility. "We meet at Corallis Dock in 1 hour." The Saturnine fleet had existed before the Great Crusade, carving out a miniature empire among the rings of Saturn. Its strength and longevity had been based on a tradition of navigational skill, essential to negotiate the infinitely complex puzzle of the rings. Its rolls of honour noted the first time it had encountered the warships of the fledgling Imperium. Its admirals saw a brother empire based on the demonstration of power and not just empty words or fanaticism, and signed a treaty with the Emperor that still held pride of place in the Admiralty spire on Enceladus. Its ships had accompanied the Great Crusade to all corners of the galaxy, but their spiritual home had always been in the rings, the endless circle of Saturn boiling above them. The Wrathful was a fine ship, Cestus admitted to himself as he stood upon the bridge alongside Antiges. It was old and lavish, panelled and decorated with the heritage of a naval aristocracy that predated the Imperial army and its fleets. Its bridge looked like it had been lifted from a naval academy on Enceladus, all dark wood map tables and glass-fronted bookcases, with only the occasional pict screen or command console to break the illusion. A ring of 9 view screens was mounted on the ceiling, where they could be lowered to provide an all-angles view of what was happening outside the ship. The command crew were in the dark blue brocaded uniforms of the Saturnine fleet, all starch and good breeding. In commandeering this vessel, Saphrax and his battle brothers had performed their task well. "Rear Admiral," said Cestus as he approached the captain's post, a grand throne surrounded by racks of charts. The throne rotated to reveal Rear Admiral Kaminska. Cestus could almost see the proud heritage etched upon her face. Strong jaw, fine neck, high cheekbones, with a slight curl to the lip that suggested acute arrogance. "Captain Cestus, it is an honor to serve the Emperor's Astartes," she responded coolly. Saphrax had described the Admiral's reaction to the acquisition of her ship to Cestus as he and the rest of the Ultramarine Honor Guard had boarded. It was prickly and vociferous. She gave a near imperceptible nod by way of acknowledgement. The gesture was all but lost in the high collar of her uniform and the thick furred mantle that hung around her shoulders. Admiral Kaminska was a stern-faced matriarch. A monocle over her left eye partly obscured a savage scar that cracked that side of her face. The monocle-sweeping chain was set with tiny skulls and pinned to the right breast of her jacket. She carried a control wand at her waist, secured by a loop of leather, and a naval pistol sat snugly in a holster at her hip. Gloved hands bore a lightning flash emblem made from metal. They were tense and gripped the supports of her command throne tightly. "The Wrathful is an impressive ship," said Cestus, attempting to dispel the fraught atmosphere. "I am glad you could respond to our summons." "Indeed it is, Lord Astartes," Kaminska said in clipped tones. "It would be a great pity to sacrifice it upon the altar of futile vengeance. As for your summons," she added, face pinching tight with anger, "it was hardly that." Cestus held his tongue. As an Astartes fleet commander, it was within the remit of his authority to take command of the ship. For now, he decided he would allow the Admiral some leeway. He was sketching a suitable reproach in his mind when Kaminska continued, "Captain Vorloff of the Boundless has also requested to accompany us, although you'll find he is of a more placid demeanor." Cestus had heard of the vessel and of Captain Vorloff. It was a warhorse ship of the fleet, its combat scars too numerous to count. Its star was in decline, as better, more powerful ships made their presence felt in the greater galaxy. Cestus suspected that the Boundless had been docked at Vangelis for some time, its role in the Great Crusade somewhat diminished, and that Captain Vorloff did not wish to submit to atrophy just yet. "Very well," said Cestus, deciding against rebuking the Admiral. He had, after all, taken her ship for a mission of dubious reasoning. Her attitude, he told himself, was to be expected. "You have your heading, Admiral. There is little time to lose." "The Wrathful is the fastest vessel in the Segmentum Solar. If your enemy is out there in the void, then we will catch him," Kaminska assured him, and whirled her command throne back around to her instrument panels. Admiral Kaminska bristled furiously as the Astartes departed the bridge. She had come to Vangelis to effect repairs and take on supplies and replacement crew. She had been looking forward to a week or so of recuperation, yet at the word of the Emperor's angels, Lord Regents of the galaxy it seemed, she and her ship were pressed back into service with barely a moment's notice. "By the authority of the Emperor of Mankind," those words were an unbendable edict that Kaminska could not refuse. It was not that she resented serving. She was a dutiful soldier of the Imperium who had distinguished herself on numerous occasions for its greater glory. No, she took umbrage at the fact that this particular mission was fostered on hunches and, as far as she could tell, whimsy. It did not sit well with Kaminska. Not at all. "Lord Admiral, the escort squadron is in position," said Helm's mistress Athena Venkmeyer. Her long hair was tied up severely, and her shoulders were forced to attention by the brocade of her uniform. "Good," Kaminska replied. "Screens down." The ring of view screens descended and glowed to life. The bright, hard gleam of Vangelis was visible from the assembly point, surrounded by a fuzzy shoal of lesser lights, satellite listening spires, fleets at anchor, and orbital debris. A distant sun was a brighter point, automatically dimmed by the view screen's limiters. Icons blinked onto the screens, showing the positions of the other ships in the makeshift fleet. The 4 escorts, Fearless, Ferox, Ferocious, and Fireblade, were flying in a slanted diamond around the Wrathful. The vessel of the Thousand Suns and Captain Motep, the Waning Moon, was a short distance away. Even at this distance, the Astartes craft was impressive, a sleek dart of red and gold. The Boundless, a cruiser like the Wrathful, but fitted out with decks for attack craft, was further out, still making its approach. Satisfied that they were about to disembark, Admiral Kaminska flicked a control stud on the arm of her throne, and the bridge voxcaster opened up. "Loose escort pattern. Keep the Waning Moon in our lee. Advance to primary waypoint, plasma engines 3/4. 3/4, came the yell from helm's mate Loden Kant at the engine helm. "Mr. Okadis, the terrorward end of the tertiary core transit, if you please," said Kaminska, having opened up a line to her principal navigator. "At your word, Lord Admiral," was the dour response from the navigator's sanctum. The tertiary core transit was the most stable warp route from Segmentum Solar to the galactic southeast. It would take them to their destination expediently, and hopefully allow the wrathful to gain some ground on whatever foes, real or imagined, awaited them in the void. It was also the route that any void-farer, if he or she did not want to take a 4 to 5 year detour, would take to arrive at the Calth system. The Astartes had been very specific about that. Admiral Kaminska would have liked to question it, but there was no bringing the Emperor's angels to account on such a triviality. She would defer to the Astartes' order, since he was in charge. It would have been unseemly to do otherwise. Kaminska resolved to discover the truth later. The Wrathful's engines kicked in, banishing the Admiral's thoughts to the back of her mind. She could feel the vibration through the panelled floor of the bridge. The escort squadron moved into formation on the view screens, followed by the waning moon and the Boundless. Whatever was out there, they would find out soon enough.
"There is an energy trail here. It's degraded but discernible,"
said Principal Navigator Orcardus's voice from his inner sanctum on the Wrathful. The Imperial ship and her fleet had reached the region of real space as indicated by the coordinates provided by Captain Cestus, the supposed site of the destruction of the Fist of Macragge, in short order. They found no sign of the ultramarine vessel. There was merely a faint energy trace that matched the Fist of Macragge's signature. Unlike battles on land, where evidence of a fight could be seen clearly and obviously, conflicts in space were not so easily identifiable. Wrecks drifted. Ships could be caught and destroyed in black holes, space debris drawn into the gravity well of a passing moon or small planet. Even solar wind could scatter the final proof of a battle ever having taken place. So it was that Kaminska had instructed her navigator to search for whatever energy traces remained behind, those last vestiges of plasma engine discharge that lingered in spite of all other evidence dissipating due to the ravages of space.
"By Saturn, the output must have been massive,"
Orcardus continued with rare emotion.
"Whatever ship left this wake is gargantuan, Admiral."
"It is possible to follow it, then?" Kaminska asked, swiveling in her command throne to regard Captain Cestus, standing silently alongside her. Orcardus's reply was succinct.
"Yes, Admiral."
"Do it," Cestus told Kaminska grimly, his expression far away. Kaminska scowled at what she perceived as arrogance and returned to her original position.
"Then do so. Set radar array to full power, Mr. Orcardus. Take us onward."
"Brotherhood," said Zadkiel, "is power." Surrounded by novices in the sepulchral gloom of the cathedra, he loomed high above the assembly within a raised pulpit of black steel.
"It is at the core of all authority in the known galaxy, and the source of humanity's dominion. This is the word of Lorgar, as it is written."
"As it is written," echoed the novices. Over 50 word-bearers had gathered for the seminary and knelt in supplication before their lord, wearing grey initiate robes over their crimson armour. The cathedral's ceiling soared on stone-clad struts overhead, adding acoustic power to Zadkiel's oratory, and the air was as still and cold as a vault. The floor, tiled with stone pages cut with passages from the Word, emphasized that this was a place of worship. It was the very thing that the Emperor had forbidden in his legions. Idolatry and zealous faith had no place in the Master of Mankind's new age of enlightenment. But here, in this place, and in the hearts of all Lorgar's children, faith would be honed into a weapon. One of the initiates stood among the congregation.
I guess we get an achievement, kind of, when you
said Zadkiel,
master the craft.
"Brother can turn on brother," said the novice, "and thus become weakened. Where then is such power?"
In the half-light, Zadkiel recognized Brother Ultis, a zealous youth with ambitious temperament.
"That is the source of its true power, novice, for there is no greater rivalry than that which exists between siblings. Only then will one seek to undo the works of the other with such vehemence, giving every ounce of his being to claim victory," Zadkiel said arrogantly, enjoying the feeling of superiority. "Upon gaining mastery over his kin, that brother will have forged a mighty army so as to overthrow him. He will have plumbed deep of his core and unleashed his hate, for in no other way can such a victory be achieved."
"So you speak of hate," said Ultis, and not brotherhood at all. Zadkiel smiled thinly to conceal his impatience. They are two wings on the same eagle, equal elements of an identical source, Zadkiel explained. We are at war with our brothers, make no mistake of that. In his short-sightedness, the Emperor has brought us to this inexorable fate. With our hate, our devotion to the credos of our Primarch, the all-powerful Lorgar, we will achieve our victory. But the Emperor holds terror, and in that surely there is strength, Altis countered, forgetting himself. The Emperor is brother to no one, cried Zadkiel, stepping forward as his words crushed Altis's challenge easily. Silence persisted for a moment, Altis shrinking back before his master as he was being chastened. None in the cathedral dared speak. All were cowed by Zadkiel's obvious power. He lurks in his dungeons on Terra, Zadkiel continued with greater zeal, but now addressing the entire congregation. The exactors and bureaucrats, the flock of Malcador who run Terra's regency, they shy away from all ties of brotherhood. They sit on a pedestal above reproach, above their brothers, above even our noble war master. The crowd roared in assent, Altis among them, kneeling once more. Is that brotherhood? The novices roared again, gauntleted fists pounding the breastplates of their armor to emphasize their fervor. These regents create a stale, meaningless world where all passion is dead and devotion is regarded as heresy. Zadkiel spat the words and was suddenly aware of a presence in the shadows behind him. One of the Furious Abyss's crew, helmsmate Sakharov, a man with delicate data probes instead of fingers, was patiently awaiting Zadkiel's notice. My apologies, Lord, he said once he had crossed the few meters between them, but Navigator Esthemia has discovered a fleet of pursuing vectors in our wake. What fleet? 2 cruisers, an escort squadron, and an Astartes strike vessel. I see. Zadkiel turned back to the congregation. Novices, you are dismissed, he said without ceremony. The assembled word-bearers departed in silence into the shadows around the edge of the cathedral, heading back to their cells to ruminate on the word. They are gaining ground, my lord, said Sakharov once they were alone. We are powerful, but these ships are smaller and outmatch us for speed. Then they will reach us before we arrive at the tertiary core transit. It was a statement, not a question. They will, my lord. Should I instruct the Magos to force the engines to maximum power, it is possible we could make warp before we are intercepted. No, said Zadkiel after some thought. Maintain course and keep me updated as to the fleet's progress. Yes, sire, replied Sakharov, saluting, and then turning sharply to return to the bridge. My lord Zadkiel, said a voice from the gloom. It was Altis, concealed by the shadows, but now stepping into the light at the centre of the cathedra. Novice, said Zadkiel, why have you not returned to your cell? I would speak with you, master, of the lessons imparted. Then illuminate me, novice. There was the slightest trace of amusement in Zadkiel's tone. The brothers of whom you spoke, you were referring to the Primarchs, Altis ventured. Go on. Our current course will bring us into conflict with the Emperor. To the unenlightened observer, it would appear that the Emperor rules the galaxy and the throne of Terra cannot be usurped. What of the enlightened novice? What do they see? That the Emperor's power is wielded through his Primarchs, Altis said with growing conviction, and by dividing them, the power of which you spoke is realized. Zadkiel's silence bade Altis to continue. It is how Terra can be defeated, when Lorgar's brothers join with him, when we bring war to those who will inevitably side with the Emperor. We will yoke our hatred and use it as a weapon, one that will not be denied. Zadkiel nodded sagely, suppressing a prickle of annoyance at this precocious yet insightful youth. Altis, however, had overreached himself. Zadkiel saw the naked ambition in his eyes, the flame within that threatened to devour Zadkiel's own. I merely seek to understand the word, Altis added, exhaling his fervour. And you shall, Altis, Zadkiel replied, a plan forming in his mind. You will be an important instrument in the breaking of Gilliman. I would be honoured, lord, said Altis, bowing his head. Truly blind men, like Gilliman, are few, Zadkiel counselled. He believes religion and devotion to be a corrupting force, something to be abhorred and not embraced, as we followers of the Word do. His pragmatic retardation is his greatest weakness, and in his dogmatic ignorance we shall strike at the heart of his favoured legion. Zadkiel spread his arms wide to encompass the cathedral, its high vaults and fluted columns, its pages of the Word, its altar and pulpit. One day, Altis, the whole galaxy will look like this. Altis bowed once more. Now return to your cell, and think on these lessons further. Yes, my lord. Zadkiel watched the novice go. A great passage in the Sermon of the Word was unfolding, and Altis would play his part. Zadkiel turned back to the pulpit, behind which was a simple altar. Zadkiel lit a candle there for the soul of Raboot Gilliman. Blind he might be, but he was a brother of sorts, and it was only right that his future death be commemorated. Aboard the Wrathful, on one of the ship's training decks, 2 World-Eaters clashed furiously in a dueling pit. It was one of several arenas in a much wider gymnasium that was replete with dummies, weights, and training mats. Weapon ranks lined the walls. The Astartes had brought their own stocks of training weapons with them, and sword breakers, short blades, bludgeons, and spears were all in evidence. It appeared that the concept of simple training was anathema to the dueling sons of Angron. Amidst the storm of blades and unbridled bloodlust, the World-Eaters fought as if to the death. Armed with unfettered chain axes and stripped to the waist, wearing crimson training breeches and black boots, their muscled bodies revealed gruesome welts and long, jagged scars. With a roar, they broke off for a moment and began circling each other in the sunken chamber of the pit. White marble showed up dark splashes from where the gladiators had wounded each other early on in the contest. A narrow drain at the centre of the pit was already clogging with blood. "Such anger!" Antiges commented, overlooking the contest from a seated position at the back of the auditorium before which it was staged. "They are Angron's progeny," said Cestus alongside him. "It is their way to be wrathful. Properly employed, their wrath is a useful tool." "Yes, but their reputation is a dire one, as is their lord's."
Well, I will Hearthstone back and think I will stop playing this game for the night. Try something else, perhaps. Okay then, what should we try now? I think I'm gonna restart the stream, so yeah, I'm gonna do that.